Hello, and thank you for tuning in to watch, listen, and hopefully learn something today from a genuine product titan and the author of the best-selling book, Inspired, How to Create Tech Products Customers Love, and the co-author of the just released, much appreciated book, Empowered, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Products. My name is Aaron Feig. I'm with Daugherty Business Solutions, help lead our product excellence capability. In my career, I've made my way around various product roles and can honestly contribute a lot of my clarity and approaches from our guest and his arsenal of experience and knowledge. I promise to do my best to get as much of that knowledge out of him in the short time we have together. The outcome that I'm shooting for is simple, that our conversation will entice more product leaders to read or listen to his content. With that said, our guest today is recognized all around the world as one of the primary thought leaders for technology product management. He is the founder of the Silicon Valley Product Group. Before starting his company, he served as the product leader for some of the most successful tech companies in the world. His first book, Inspired, truly led a generation of people, including myself and companies of all sizes, to better understand and value the need for product teams over feature teams. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Marty Cagan. Hey, Marty.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just jump in. Marty, your first book, Inspired, did an incredible job at articulating not only the need to transition teams from feature teams to true product teams, allowing them to truly focus on solving real problems, but was really a blueprint for companies to achieve it. I'd love to kick off by turning it over to you to help us understand why you and Chris Jones, the co-author, felt that this book was so important and why now.
Sure. Well, Inspired was really aimed at product teams and especially product managers on product teams, because we would meet a lot of product teams, and I still do. That's my core area, is working with product teams that are working on some pretty hard problems. And that is really my favorite topic still. I feel like every team is different and every problem the team is facing is different. So it's always fresh. And, I get to pick the company. So I get to work with people that are working on problems that I think are, they think and I think are important problems. Yeah. Things that make a bit of a difference in the world and hopefully for good. So I love doing that. But I did find over the last few years, especially, that many companies, the book Inspired did spread way beyond what I expected. I kind of still had that Silicon Valley bubble mentality. How many people could possibly want to do this stuff? But turns out a lot of people around the world want to do this stuff. But what I learned was that many people, they wanted to work this way, but their companies weren't either allowing them to work this way, or they kind of had to fight the company at every step. And, when I started hearing this, which was the first time probably like 5 years ago started hearing about this, I was curious, like, why? How is this even controversial? Look at the most successful companies in the world. Look at how valuable they are. Mm-hmm. Right. And why wouldn't you want some of that? And, but anyway, it turns out there were quite a few people that while they did admire the Amazons of the world, they didn't think, either they didn't know how to work that way or they didn't think they could work that way. In many cases, they didn't even know there was another way. You know what I mean? They
Absolutely.
Just grew up doing it however they were doing it. Yep. So basically, we realized that we didn't just need to share the techniques that teams use to solve hard problems. We needed to share the techniques that companies use to set up an environment that teams could do good work.
Absolutely.
And so really we're really talking here about the managers and leaders of product management, product design, and engineering. And that's what Empowered was aimed at, is the techniques that they need, which is honestly a more complex set of techniques than the teams need. It's a harder set of techniques. They're they're paid more too. There's a lot more difficulty, a lot more responsibility, but anyway, we wanted to share those techniques, and that was started about 2 years ago. We decided to tackle the project of a book. It's a big project to do a book, and it's just out a few days ago. So finally it reached the end of that.
Yeah. Now it's all the stuff after the book gets released, right? All the fun stuff. Well, thanks. Right. That's great. And actually is a really good segue into where I'd like to kind of jump into next. And I really appreciate the time that you spend in the book talking about those roles, about the product leadership and the management roles and the differences between them and their respective responsibilities. I think all too often when we're brought in to help product teams with whatever we're brought in to help them with, we pretty quickly identify that there are other areas that need to be addressed to sustain any progress or any forward momentum. That's usually and often a result of leadership, something that maybe they are doing or something maybe they're not doing. I wouldn't mind if you can touch on some of those responsibilities that you call out in the book, both maybe on the leadership and the management side, and why it's so important to support that culture of truly empowered product teams.
Yeah, well, it's usually when I explain I'll sit down with the chief technology officer or the chief product officer, or ideally both of them, and I'll kind of give them the answer, the same, they're asking the same question essentially you just asked, and I'll explain it. And I will say that very often they're a little stunned. They're surprised at how much work it is and how different it is from what they kind of signed up for.
Yeah.
And so
fair enough.
I'll just sort of warn you that it's not small.
Yeah.
It shows up in how teams work, but the root is in the leadership. It really is. It either happens or not in the leadership. So if you do want to have these empowered product teams, the product leaders have to step up to sort of two main buckets of work. The first main bucket is really about the people, which is hiring, staffing, and coaching, especially coaching. In fact, a lot of them will, when I'll tell them that the most important responsibility for you as a leader is coaching your people, they'll go, that's not even on my top 3 list right now. And so I'll say, and more, for a lot of your people, it's at least half their time. And they're like, where am I going to get all this time?
Right.
And so it's a big one. But I also point out to them, this is why it's so critical that people don't know these things. They're not taught in school. You're not born knowing these, having these skills. So without that coaching, it's kind of a house of cards that all collapses. And I point out to them how much time the good companies invest in coaching and developing their people. Even just looking at how much time good companies spend at the hiring process. So that's the first bucket, is staffing and coaching. And in the new book, coaching is the single biggest area because it is the most important area. And it's really the foundation for everything else. The second bucket of stuff is really the leadership activities. If you want to call, the first bucket is more the management activities. This is more the leadership activities. How do you provide like the way Netflix phrases it, lead with context, not control. The point is, if you want to have empowered product teams, you don't want to command and control. That's not the management style you want to have. You don't want to just hand them a roadmap and say, build these features. You want to say, look, here's the problem you need to solve. We need you to solve. Okay, here's the problem. But we know if you're going to make the decisions, you need the context. So what's the context? You need to know the product vision. What are we really trying to achieve? You need to know the company dashboard. What are the metrics for this business? How do we know if it's a healthy business? What's a reasonable acquisition cost? What's our sales capability? What are our privacy constraints? What are our contractual obligations for, say, like business development deals? All of these are what are our costs involved? Not to mention what's our monetization strategy? So this is all context. And the way that shows is in the product vision, in the company objectives, in the product strategy, in the team topology, which is how we structure our product teams, and in particular in the team objectives. So every team knows which problem they need to solve. That's the context. And those are not minor things. Those are pretty serious things.
Yeah.
Things like product vision and architecture, you do once every few years. So you don't have to do that all the time. You have to have sort of an early big investment and then you leverage that. But things like product strategy are living. Those are constantly, we are updating. And so the leadership responsibilities are also quite big. But together, that's what you're looking for. The only other thing I'd add is, when we talk about management and leadership, if you're a first level people manager, then most of your job is management and a little bit is leadership. If you're a chief technology officer or a chief product officer, then most of your job is leadership and a little bit is management. But fundamentally, those are the two big buckets of work.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. A lot of what you said we'll try to touch on throughout this conversation. Let's jump into the topic, which kind of gets back to the title of the book, is truly empowering these product teams. Marty, we regularly work with large organizations, mature organizations that have a history of, let's just say a lot of legacy baggage, right? Which might be from various acquisitions, mergers, oftentimes tried and failed transformations, whatever you name it, leaving behind, quite frankly, a mess of architectural, technical, structural, and even sometimes I like to say mindset that tends to plague them for some time and often never really coming up for that full breath of air. And I think these are the same companies that, well, I know they're the same companies that are very successful and oftentimes the leaders in their respective industries. And I say for now, it's also very evident that by the continuous attempts to transform the organization, they are feeling and experiencing probably the same things that your clients are feeling is the threats of companies that can and will truly innovate and are problem-solving focused organizations. I'm curious from your perspective, why don't more organizations why are they not more directly focused on this type of transformation, a transformation that your book very clearly states and confirms that could change the way they do business and how they compete? And I guess when I speak about transformation, it's specifically that dramatic focus on creating and scaling empowered product teams.
Yeah. Well, this is a super difficult topic because the truth is, in most cases, they will not, the company, we're talking established pre-internet companies, whether it's General Motors or GE or, any of these older established companies or a bank, for example, or any of these large institutions. The truth is they're very unlikely to get serious about the transformation you and I are talking about until and unless they have, I like to describe it as they've got the fear of God in them. You know what I mean? And usually that comes from Amazon. Doesn't have to. If it's General Motors, if they're not scared to death of Tesla, I don't know what rock they're living under.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you're a bank, if you're not scared of Stripe, I don't know what rock you're living under, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it often takes a near-death experience before they decide to get serious. And what's really unfortunate about that is that often now it's too late. Because these skills don't just take 30 days to do. It's more like 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, it's not an onboarding
to really
skill.
Transform and get a company working the way they need to in order to have a chance competing against these companies.
Yeah.
So now this, of course, is what board of directors is supposed to be doing. And in several companies, that's exactly what happened. The board decided if their CEO understood this or not. And if the answer was no, they replaced the CEO. And they're like, look, it's our job to make sure the company is prepared for the future.
Yeah.
And you're not.
Absolutely.
And you're resting on your laurels and you think that those companies are not going to go after you. But and I realize I'm a product person, which means I'm naturally a paranoid around this. I'm like, I always am worried that some other company is going to come along and take our customers because
Sure.
they're going to do a much better job.
Yeah.
And most of my career is spent helping those companies disrupt the old guys.
Right. Absolutely.
But I have a lot of friends that have gone on and taken the head of product job or head of technology job at some of these older companies. And so I have spent a lot of time over the last 10 years with these older companies. And, this is one of the things I've learned is that unless the CEO really gets this, is very unlikely they'll change.
Yeah. You had mentioned the book as well. Around Boeing, and that, and I don't know it verbatim here, but it was that if Boeing would have been more in a empowered product teams, that, and I think you used the word likelihood. It wasn't, nothing other is perfect, but the challenges that they faced and happened would have potentially been drastically reduced, and that really struck me because I think a lot, and correct me if I'm wrong, is you focus on empowered product teams focusing on innovation and the value of them solving problems. And if you don't mind, my curiosity is the comment that the likelihood that the problem wouldn't have happened, or that this length of time that it's taken them to truly figure it out might have been reduced, or maybe it's a combination of both, but would love for you to dig into
Well,
it.
I was really talking about the problem. I mean, realize what Boeing did is they outsourced command and control software to a firm in India, which of course is there. I have no critique of the firm they hired.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that firm is not their fault. This is squarely on the leadership at Boeing that thought that was a good idea because maybe they would save a few bucks.
Yeah.
Which of course is not true anyway, because whenever you outsource to a firm like that, you're going to end up paying a whole lot more than if they had the right team themselves. More generally, I'm pointing out, look at what they're thinking of. They were thinking of that technology as a cost, instead of thinking of it as the prime enabler of their business. The fact that they did not have a team whose sole mission was making, control software that's the safest, most fuel efficient, control software for passenger jets in the world.
Yep.
It's like, whoa, that's crazy. That's the missed opportunity.
Yep.
If Tesla had decided to go after passenger jets instead of, cars or maybe SpaceX rockets, then Boeing would be toast, in my opinion. And they deserve it from that. I mean, if that's the way their leadership thinks, they deserve what they get.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. Thank you for that. In the book you also covered, and we mentioned it earlier, is, and you talk about this a lot. I listen to a lot of your talks and so forth, but it's the topic of product strategy. And you're pretty transparent that from your experience through all the many companies that you worked with, product teams don't have a product strategy in most cases. I think, and I hope that comment, if they haven't watched your videos, I hope this comment alone might challenge some of the leaders to revisit or revalidate what they're currently using. And I guess my question is, can you walk us through what you've experienced that kind of forms that conviction about product strategies, and not necessarily to put you on the spot, but if you have any maybe examples, I think it might make it real for some of the people that are going to listen in.
Yeah, no problem. Well, because that's a good example of when we really want to talk the center of what a good product leader does versus not good. Mm-hmm. So the reason I say that most companies don't have a product strategy is, I'll come back and sort of define what a good company means by it. But what most companies have is not empowered product teams. They have feature teams. And those feature teams are basically there not to serve customers, but to serve the business. So literally they're set up where they serve one or more stakeholders in the company. And those stakeholders each have some amount, there's different ways this is done, but some amount of allocation for features.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially they choose features that will go on a roadmap. And then those are given to the feature team to design and code and then deploy. And you could say, well, like, what's the product strategy there? I mean, you could, if you really stretch it, the product strategy is please as many stakeholders as possible with the resources we have.
Right.
But of course, that's not a product strategy at all. That's all it is a resource allocation strategy. Right. Now, there's a lot of things wrong with that model. First of all, we know that and it's not about stakeholders not being smart. In my experience, they usually are among the smartest in the company. That's not the issue. The issue is that no matter who you are, just no matter where those features come from, most of them are not going to solve the problem. And even if you say they assume they did, the teams are just basically set up as mercenaries. They don't own the problem there. They're just there to code. Mm-hmm. So there's not very much motivation. There's nobody, really, it's not what we want. And if you contrast that in a good product company, a good product strategy is meant to help us get the most out of the people we have. No company I've ever met in nearly 40 years of doing tech products, I've never met a company that had all the engineers and designers they needed. They all are working with less. Even when it's going great and they're making money hand over fist, they still can't recruit them fast enough. Right. So nobody has as much as we want. So product strategy is about getting the most out of what we really have. Now, that's where product leaders really earn their salary. They have to focus on what's really important. Doing 100 things, in a year is not, those 100 are not equally important. A few of those things, if they're done well, can really move the needle. The rest of them won't.
Yeah.
So it's a good product strategy starts with focusing in on what's really important for that business. This next step is good product companies. They use their insights, which come from either the data, or it comes from the talking to customers, or it comes from new enabling technology, or it comes from industry analysts or changes in the industry landscape. And they make they realize those are levers. And if they can double down on that, like, okay, mobile is really important here, or machine learning is a critical technology for us, or whatever. Or our real problem is we have not achieved product market fit. Mm-hmm. And until we do that, we really need to get serious here. So whatever it is, they need to then focus on that, leverage the insights, and then assign those problems to product teams to go work on. And that's really what a product strategy does. And yeah, some product strategies are better than others. I was, you asked for an example. In the new book, I shared a company which many people have heard of, Pandora. It was a music service that went public, in my opinion, way too early, before they had nearly enough engineers. They just had a small number of engineers, which of course is the strongest argument for how important a product strategy is. But they didn't have any product strategy. All they did was try to please as many stakeholders as they could. And in fact, they did that with a system that basically just gave funny money out to the stakeholders and let them bid for features, which is the absence of product strategy. Right. And of course, it was no surprise to me to see what happened to them. It was very predictable. So, and you contrast that with good companies that really take this seriously.
The baking sale technique, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's the key. So it is, product leaders spend a lot of time, especially on the insights that power a good product strategy.
Yeah, right. Thank you for that. So the next thing is something that I think will resonate with a lot of people. And it's something that has, because of the reality of the last 10 months, which is being highly discussed and focused on, is this concept of, it's not a new concept, but it's getting a lot of attention now, which is remote work. And I know you have a strong stance on that, being that the product teams, including product managers, the product designers, and the tech leads, should make every attempt possible to be co-located. If the delivery teams work more efficiently remote, then I guess so be it. I think I just saw an article, or maybe the headline, that said Google stepped back from work from home indefinitely, and their stance is to plan to head back sometime in September. I'm curious if these last 10 months, a couple things, has that conviction, that stance changed at all? I could probably answer that without answering it, but and if it hasn't, have you seen any patterns over the last 10 months that give you hope or optimism that true product discovery and product teams could be effective with some level of remote collaboration?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. Really, the question itself has changed since the pandemic started. Because before the pandemic, the question I would consistently get from CEOs, from practitioners, was, what can we do to maximize our chances of real innovation, consistent innovation? And that, of course, there's plenty of evidence that co-located teams are hard to beat.
Right.
Now, even before the pandemic, that was running into a real problem, especially in San Francisco, Seattle, New York, London, sort of the main tech hubs, because we couldn't find enough people that could afford to live in these cities. So even before the pandemic, there was a major move to remote offices and remote work. Yep. But not, I guess I shouldn't say, there was a major move to remote offices, but not really for remote work. That was a little bit.
Right.
The pandemic, of course, changed this whole equation, the calculus. As soon as the pandemic hit, the question changed. The question was, co-location is not an option. What can we do to maximize our chances in a work from home environment? And that's where I spend a lot of time on. Now, there are a couple caveats at first. First of all, lockdown is different than work from home. If parents have to deal with childcare and homeschooling, then you can't expect them to be able to get a lot of anything done. That's more of a survival situation for a lot of parents. Absolutely. So we have to acknowledge that. And I will say, work from home, there are some really good scenarios with work from home, but when you've got that obligation on top of work from home, it's really not work from home, right? It's major challenges just for surviving.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say is the good part of work from home is the talent pool expands to not just the people you can recruit to come work in your city, but to anywhere in the world, essentially anywhere with an internet connection, a reliable internet connection. And in fact, I'm most excited about not work from home, but work from anywhere.
Yeah.
I love that. I think people can have an amazing quality of life and, work on a great product team. So there is a benefit. That said, what teams have consistently found is delivery work, every product team does both discovery and delivery. Sure. Delivery work is naturally divide and conquer. And so it works quite well in a work from home, dispersed environment. Discovery is what companies have been struggling with. Amazon, Netflix have been counting the days till they can get their teams back together because the innovation has really struggled. And you have seen quite a few companies say, we hope offices are done and we're going to close our headquarters. And then, of course, they're like, oh man, we haven't innovated in months. What's going on? And, it's exactly what we've been seeing even before the pandemic. Work from home has some real challenges when it comes to discovery. you might notice it works best with open source software, which is a lot less discovery than delivery. So anyway, I do think it will get better. But the challenge is it's not so much the technology, but the behaviors of people that we're dealing with. And, the technology changes quite fast, behaviors, not so much. And so we have a lot of work to do as an industry to get to the point where teams can collaborate effectively working remotely. There are lots of techniques that help with that. That's what I mainly share with people, and I've been writing about them. So it's definitely not impossible, but at least I think today the CEOs have a much deeper appreciation for why collaboration is truly important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you. Well, Marty, that about wraps up our time together. Any final parting words of wisdom before we wrap this up?
I mean, these were all great questions, right in the center of the kinds of things I talk about. Maybe the one thing that didn't happen to come up, but I always try to tell people is the most important part of all of this, really good product companies, consistent innovation, is making sure that you are truly leveraging your engineers, that they really are the consistent source of innovation. If we say, if you're just using your engineers to code, they're only getting about half their value. Absolutely. You're only getting about half their value. And so you really want to make sure that the engineers are front and center. If you're a consultancy, that means making sure that the customer understands that the engineers are going to really be key enablers. You want to leverage their brains, not just give them specs.
Absolutely. Well, Marty, I can't thank you enough for just taking the time, giving us really a high-level review of the book and sharing your knowledge and perspectives on what I think we'll all agree are some of the most pressing topics around product leadership and ones that they should be discussing. I will say there's so much we didn't cover that the book does. I encourage anyone in the product space to pick up both of Marty's books, Inspired and Empowered, which he co-authored with Chris Jones. And definitely subscribe to his blog, which is svpg.com. Marty, thank you. Can't thank you enough, and I hope you have a blessed day.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Yeah, right on.